Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based on the west side of Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictive compulsive behaviors. Welcome to my podcast, named after my recent book, It's Not About the Sex. Here we have honest conversations related to compulsive sexual behavior and trauma, all from a sexual health perspective. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints and practical strategies toward establishing greater intimacy and a more deeply connected life. Let's begin. Mariya Javed-Payne is a licensed independent clinical social worker, licensed alcohol and drug counselor, certified Brainspotting trainer and consultant. In her clinical practice, she offers somatic psychotherapy, brainspotting therapy, and psychedelic-assisted therapy. She is the owner of Awaken Consulting Services and co-owner of Institute for Integrative Therapies. So welcome, Mariya.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that we could finally make this work. This has been, I think, at least a year or two. Well, I don't even know.
I think we talked in 2020, right when COVID was happening, kicking off.
Wow.
So
3 years then.
hmm
And I think that there's been kind of a time warp during the pandemic. So it doesn't surprise me that I thought it was a year or two, but it's actually 3. So I'm glad that we can finally share the time and so glad that you can be with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So the first question I have for you today is just to share with us about the work you do with addictions in your practice.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a clinical social worker and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor here in the state of Minnesota. And I've had a lot of different experiences working in the field. So my history is, working in different treatment centers, detox, and then I was the director of behavioral health at United Family Medicine, which was a federally qualified health center and a community health center. And I started their addiction programs there in conjunction with the medical providers. So we were working on projects and creating programming for patients struggling with opioid use and designing a medication-assisted therapy program where we were having the medical providers trained in how to offer Suboxone and other MAT services in conjunction with trauma therapy, including brain spotting specifically. So it was a really beautiful outpatient space that we made for clients and had them come in for groups as well as individual work. And, since then, I have also held a private practice, which I'm more formally engaged in now full time. And I work with addiction through an intensive lens. So I don't do hourly sessions like a lot of therapists do or people are familiar with in the community. The work that I do is a deep dive. So I have clients coming from different states or here in Minnesota. They come and they stay for about a week, and we work every day for upwards of 5 to 6 hours with break, of course. But we're working on the core roots of the addiction, and a lot of the time that's trauma related or the roots of that come from places where we felt really helpless or unable to sort of move past difficult challenges in our lives. So we typically do lots of brain spotting, a lot of kind of rewriting the narrative and working on building an internal structure of being able to self-soothe versus needing to use a substance or behavior to do that. It's a really beautiful time. I get to share space with people in this, approach. And I think that like I went into that space because of one of my mentors, Robbie Abels, who, taught me a lot about Brainspotting and addictions. And she used that model. What's really nice about it is that when you're doing like hourly therapy, once a week or every other week, there's a lot of space in between where the dangers of the addiction or the temptations or the cravings can, be around and be very profound, to deal with. But when you set aside a big chunk of time where you're really creating a curated space to address this issue and being willing to really go to the depths of where it comes from and how to work through it and live beyond it, that sacred time, if you want to call it that, is how I like to approach it. And I do like a very intensive intake with folks who are wanting to do this type of work to make sure that it's an appropriate fit. And we go from there. The other way that I've been working with addictions, and specifically sex addiction, and porn addiction, is through ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So I'm one of the owners of Institute for Integrative Therapies here in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and we are utilizing ketamine right now, and we'll utilize the other psychedelic medicines as they become available. And I've had a lot of clients really heal from and be able to break some of the patterning by using ketamine and this approach as well.
Wow. I wanted to mention two things. So you mentioned core roots of addiction, and I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because so many of our listeners, my clients, will ask why did I end up with these addictive compulsive behaviors? And so I'm wondering if we could address that in a nutshell, if you could. But I think that's a really important topic.
Yeah, that's a big topic with probably a lot of insights from a lot of professionals in this field. But typically I've been working in this field for the last 14 years, and I'm a person in recovery myself. So I've been sober for just about that much time, 14 years. And I think what I've seen over and over again about the roots, oftentimes trauma is a core root, and that can be, physical, emotional, sexual, mental. Those are the common like things that we think about with trauma, but it can also be misattunement or neglect, developmental, when you were growing up and you didn't have your emotional needs, seen or met, or heard. And a lot of clients, I've worked with come in and they're like, I have no idea why I ended up this way. And when we really start to, tease out their history, they begin to find out like, oh, yeah, some things did happen to me. And it doesn't have to be like a severe, abuse history. It can be this ongoing kind of misattunement or other pieces of like just living life that we need in order to be healthy, relationships, having a stable environment, your socioeconomic needs met. And the more levels of instability there are, I think there's more of a chance for folks to develop, what we call ritualized self-soothing behaviors. I don't even like to use the word addiction that often anymore, because although it can be a helpful label to some, I think it's also connected to a lot of stigma. And, behaviors that are compulsive typically have to do with, feelings of helplessness or feelings of not having control. And it's a way to self-soothe. So, the destigmatizing of that is so crucial.
I love that ritualized self-soothing. Being in recovery myself from compulsive sexual behavior, I don't use the term sex addiction anymore. And I use compulsive sexual behavior, but I love ritualized self-soothing because that's so descriptive and so accurate. So
Mhm.
I may have to borrow that from you and
Take it. I didn't come up with it myself. It's been
it's
passed down to me.
right, as it always is, right?
Absolutely.
Um, I just also wanted to let you know that Robbie was a guest on the podcast quite a while ago, and we're doing trainings together and our buddies, and I just love that we're all part of the same family. Really, it's a wonderful community, the brain spotting. So, share a little bit about your work with brain spotting, starting with how you even started getting trained in it originally and what a brain spotting intensive is all about and whatever you'd like to share about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's a special story. Brain spotting really was like a big pivot point in my life. So as I mentioned, I'm a person in recovery, and I had done a lot of therapy, lots and lots of therapy since I was a teenager. Had been to 8 treatment centers, was in and out of institutions for two or 3 years in the darkest parts of my own addiction. And I was 7 years in recovery when I discovered brain spotting as a client. So I had a friend who had, done a brain spotting session with someone and told me like, "Oh, hey, I did this cool therapy called brain spotting." And I was like, "That's intriguing." Um, and so I looked for a therapist and, made an appointment, and I did my first session. And I felt after I walked out of that session that I had just done about 6 months worth of therapy in 1 hour. And I remember walking out that day and being like, where the hell has this been my whole, like, where was this all this time? And I kept going back, and I went back every week, and I still continue to receive brain spotting as a client. I had brain spotting weekly for probably 4 years, and I have to give it so much credit for helping me heal from so many of the traumas that I was carrying that we just couldn't touch with talk therapy or other forms of therapy in the past. So this accelerated process of healing began to happen for me, and I started to feel more connected to my body, more connected to my consciousness, and just like safer in the world, because that was something I never had an experience of my whole life. And feeling safe in your own being is such a powerful shifting point when you can help people, get to that space. I was so intrigued. I was still in grad school at the time, actually, when I was a client, in my first session. And I remember like a week later, I looked up on the internet, how does one get trained in brain spotting? Like, what does it take? And ironically, the universe put it right in front of me that a phase 1 training was happening like a month or two later here in St. Paul. And I signed up. I signed up for phase 1 and phase 2. And I remember going to that training, and just it felt like I was at this big pivot point of like, this is going to be a huge part of my life somehow. I don't know how. And I took it and I ran with it, and I used it with clients, and I was then able to bring that into a leadership position at the hospital I was working at, the clinic I was working at, and I became a consultant. I was all in. I was eating, drinking, sleeping, dreaming, brain spotting, the addictive ways, right? You get into something you like, and I was all in. But luckily, this was something about healing and, recovery. And yeah, I became a consultant. And then a few years later, I was able to become a trainer, which is one of the greatest honors of my life, to be in a space of, being an addict on the street, houseless, traumatized, doing all sorts of things that we do in order to, get the fix that we need, and really broken. Like I was really, really broken. Like many of us experience that sense of hopelessness, helplessness, suicidal ideation. all of those things. And now being in a position of giving that offering back, it's one of the greatest honors of my life. And I don't take it lightly. I have a training tomorrow, and I'm just like all day been getting ready and preparing and being in the sacredness of it all, really being in the sacredness of the power of healing and all of the people that helped me get here, David Grand and Robbie Abels and many of the other trainers, Jeff Ryan, Steve Sawyer, and mentors and elders and supports, helping in that way. Like when we feel so isolated and in addiction, they sort of represent this like family in a way, right? Or a community, the communal aspect of it. So yeah, I'm just really grateful to be in this position and hope I can live a life of service and humility and enjoy the connections that are made over the years.
It puts such a smile on my face because even though I don't know you well, I can feel the dedication and the commitment and the love and the it's palpable. And in my own way, I've integrated Brainspotting into my practice, but I love that basically you've come from the streets to being of service and giving back, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So thank you. Thank you so much for doing this work and for dedicating yourself in this way. It gives me goosebumps, actually.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. I didn't get here alone, that's for sure. I had a few people
Right.
throughout the way, like hopefully all of us can, that nudged along and said, hey, you can do it, you're worth it. And seeing things in, helping you see things in yourself that you can't without that attunement, without that reflection, that mirroring back. So yeah, it's definitely a gift.
Yeah. So shifting gears a bit, I want to come back to what you said about ketamine, because here in Los Angeles, ketamine clinics, um, psychedelic assisted therapies are popping up all over. And as we know, it's such a growing edge for our industry, for our healing work that we do. And yet there's limitations legally and ethically. And so if you could just walk us through the process of, if somebody is curious about ketamine as something to help either their compulsive behaviors or their depression or a combination usually of those things, how would you talk to them about ketamine and help them make an informed decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing I'll say about that is the design of the way that we approach doing this work with psychedelics. So I know that there's a lot of infusion centers and things popping up, and our model isn't that. Our model is really based on relationship and attunement, because that's the biggest factor and driver in all healing, I believe. So the way that our model is set up is that, from that initial call that a client might make, that connection, that relationship, that attunement begins. And we're really trying to figure out what is helpful for each individual, whether it's ketamine or whether it's something else. So we have an assessment that we do, a diagnostic assessment that the therapist does initially. And then we do a medical evaluation. So we clear both mental health wise and medically if the client is appropriate for this path. And once that happens and the client is cleared, we then go into a process of preparation. So we might do, 2 to 4 sessions of diving into what's, happening for the client. What are we wanting to work on? And then again, going to the roots, like here's this opportunity to have this catalyst on board, which is the medicine, the psychedelic. And we can really go all in because we have the support of that medicine to allow us to do that. So in preparation, we're really looking at intentions and affirmations also, like what's the outcome that you hope to have. And we take all of that into the actual medicine session then. Clients create these beautiful altars for them in the room. So they bring in different items and objects and mementos, meaningful things to them, and we do an invocation ceremony for them to really connect with what they've brought in, and it's in the centerpiece of the room.
Mm.
They will oftentimes write this affirmation on a cardstock that's also the centerpiece. And then we guide them into that process of not only like connecting with the goal that they have, but also surrendering. Because a big part of doing psychedelic work is about surrender and not having control and allowing that deeper healing intelligence to emerge.
Mm.
And the medical provider is present as well as the therapist. The therapist stays the entire time, but we send off the client together and we receive the client at the end together, all of us together. So that landing and then helping them kind of integrate back into, this reality, this 3D reality that we're in. And then having some integration sessions afterwards with the therapist to
Mm.
take all of the learnings from that session or whatever emerged and weaving it into your actual practical life. The beauty with ketamine, it's an atypical psychedelic, but the beauty of ketamine is that it's relatively safe. So for most bodies, it's relatively safe. It's been around for a lot of years and used worldwide. And it's also a profound has a profound antidepressant effect, an anti-anxiety effect. So clients typically feel this immediate sense of relief, immediate calm, and they can then access the things that were troubling them in a different way where they're not in fight or flight, right? So it's an opportunity, like I said, a catalyst where it's the key that opens the door for us to be able to do deeper work and make all these changes. There's a window for 10 to 14 days after one has used ketamine where there is an increase in glutamate in the body. So ketamine stimulates glutamate, and glutamate is a substance in the body that creates learning opportunity. So like the neurons in our brain, they're connected and have more glutamate. They
Mm.
create more tendrils and more roots in the axons to connect with one another. So why it's so important for us to add therapy to this process. If you're going to an infusion, you're going to get that antidepressant effect. But unless you're really working on creating new behavioral pathways and new ways of thinking and working on the narrative, it won't last. But if we can actually use that opportunity that we have in that window to offer different ways of thinking, different ways of behaving, adding new habits, then those neural networks fuse in that good way. So I'm seeing some really profound things with clients. I'm skeptical about everything. So I was like, I don't know about this. I did the training
Mm.
and all that. And I was like, I don't know
Mm.
about this. And I got into it. I kind of like to be learning, the newest things that are out there to help people. And then I started working with clients and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really profound. So yeah, if you're somebody who's interested and wants to know more, do your research, and really focus on the relationship with your providers. And if it feels like you're being attuned to and connected with, and that they're on this journey with you, and you can clear yourself medically and mental health wise to use ketamine, I think it's a very powerful opportunity to create a mindset shift.
I really appreciate the focus on the attunement and the relationship.
Mhm.
And you kind of said this, but I want to emphasize that really the earlier wounds are about relationship and misattunement, right? The ruptures. So I really hear that there's this arc from that blueprint to the repair. And it just, your particular approach sounds so comprehensive and so thoughtful. And I hope we have similar programs. I need to learn more about it out here to understand, but there's something about the heart that you bring to it that is, again, really palpable.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for
Wonderful.
mentioning that piece about attachment. I didn't mention that earlier, that, some of the core roots of, um, addiction issues are so about attachment and early attachment rupture. And so we use that behavior or substance to, almost as an attachment figure. It's something that you can dependably like rely on for a while until it becomes unreliable, similar to the insecure attachment patterns that we might have grown up with. Um, so yeah, that's a huge element of all of this work, is creating really the core of it. I mean, I do a lot of consultation with therapists and um, support the team at IIT. We have about 23 therapists here doing psychedelic work. We have, a handful of more therapists starting out every few months and doing, new cohorts with us. But I just emphasize over and over again, forget the technique, forget the brain spotting. Brain spotting, we use the pointer and we have all these eye positions. Forget all of that. If you like,
Right.
it's about you in your beingness with another human being and really
Mhm.
witnessing them, really seeing them for who they are and being able to
Mhm.
hold that and to hold the charge when, trauma is coming out and emerging, and having a body, in ourselves, in our own bodies as professionals, offering this work, this container that can hold all of life's experiences without judgment, without um, falling into it, but really being in a place of groundedness and deep compassion.
So I'm going to ask you, the next question is what I consider the crystal ball question. So as we look into the future, what do you see? What is the future of addiction recovery, addiction healing, addiction professionalism, whatever that might be, that is coming down the pike?
That's a great question. I think about that a lot, actually. I think that psychedelic assisted therapy is probably going to be the next normal way of working with mental health and addiction. It's not appropriate for all substance use or other addictions. All of the skills that we know as professionals to support our clients, we need to use to help stabilize folks. But I think that there are some medicines that, right now are being researched, like LSD and psilocybin, for, alcohol use and other issues. And there's promise there. And typically the profile of most psychedelics is that they're not addictive. Unbeknownst to, like, we often think, oh, it's a drug. And even in the recovery community, there's a lot of hesitance with, partaking in this type of work. But I think that there's a lot of promise there. My prayer, my hope is that the addiction community and field will really shift into more of a space of non-judgment. Over the years working in this space, so many clients have been abandoned in treatment, kicked out. Oh, I relapsed. I got kicked out of my sober living. I got kicked out of inpatient, and they've bounced around. And that's just another attachment rupture. And it's just recreating that same trauma wound. And so I hope that structurally we can create spaces where that type of non-judgment and unconditional regard can happen. And I know that it's hard. I know that it's hard as a professional to be in that place, but I'm hoping that will happen. I'm also seeing a lot around groups. Like, the crystal ball is showing me that our future of healing is collective. I think that a lot of the Western way is to do things individually, individual, the rugged individual. That's what the United States has been kind of based off of. And I think that it's not working. I think it works for a period of time or for some, but there's this loss of connection that comes with addiction, right? And so what do? We reconnect. And how do we learn how to be with one another again, aside or beyond from what separates us? So I'm seeing like group work and retreats and spaces in nature, uh,
Mm-hmm.
communal gatherings. I'm seeing the structure of society, change where we destigmatize. And I think psychedelics will really offer this big catalyst and push because that's what they do. They go beyond that neocortical and expand into the subcortex where all of our creativity and, the dreaming lives. And I think the more people who utilize this will be able to then have more creativity to find solutions to problems that we've been struggling with. I also hope that we start to use more somatic approaches in therapy and in the medical profession, and perhaps shift away from like, oh, here, take this pill or take this, MAT alone, right? And go into integrating care. I've done care integration, in a large medical facility, and it's hard
Mm-hmm.
because we're so used to being siloed.
Yeah.
So true integration is about not creating a hierarchy, like, oh, medical's here, mental health's over here, but seeing people as complete beings, and that these different layers that we have are all connected, and one isn't like greater or less than the other. So that's my crystal ball prediction.
I love it. That sounds fantastic. Let's only hope that the majority of what you just shared can come to fruition.
I've got my
Um,
fingers crossed.
Me too, fingers and toes, actually.
There we go.
So, last question. If there's a particular takeaway that you would like our listeners to be able to make portable from our conversation today, what might that be?
I think it's uh, my my deepest value or philosophy or belief is that every single person has the capacity to heal, and it's in you. It's the life force. So if you're alive, you have it. Researching, finding, looking, searching for what you feel, in your heart, in your gut, in your mind is going to help you, and to not ever give up. I mean, if my story is any can be a salve for anyone, that it's possible, if you commit to your life and to yourself. This choosing to um, go on a different path, even if you have no idea how, even if you feel like there's no way out, that what you seek seeks you. And if you seek it, I hope and pray that it'll come sooner than later. And to also know that the world is a really big place and there's so many different healing modalities out there. And so if one isn't working for you, to keep searching for other things that can help, and follow what you're drawn to. So that innate kind of intuition that you have inside, to follow that's your inner healer. That's the wisdom within. So I think that's what I would say.
Well, on that very touching note, I so appreciate you joining me today, and I truly, it's a pleasure to have you here and to share everything that's going on for you personally and for your programs in both in Minneapolis and in, I guess, Eden Prairie, I heard, and Brainspotting, which I know you take on the road. So I'm sure we'll cross paths at some point or another. And I wish you only the best. So take good care.
Likewise, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me, sharing space.
Thanks for listening today. It was so wonderful sharing the time with my colleague and friend, Mariya Javed-Payne, and discussing this really meaningful and cutting-edge topic. She can be reached through her website at awakenconsultingservices.com. And if you're so inclined, please give us a 5-star rating and be sure to subscribe and share my podcast with those who may benefit. I look forward to you joining us the next time, and don't forget to stay connected.